Once again, I take note of the points raised by the representative of the Russian Federation. May I also remind that, for instance, the foreign minister of Serbia spoke before the Security Council members at least twice in the last two meetings on UNMIK. And with regard to the list of speakers under Rule 37, the presidency took note of the fact that all these requests came from foreign ministers who took the time to travel to New York to be at the United Nations on this anniversary. This clearly indicates that they feel that their countries have been and are still being directly impacted by this war. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary General and the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Croatia, Czech, Estonia, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Netherlands, North Macedonia, Poland, Republic of Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, Spain, and Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite His Excellency Mr. Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. And I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President, Excellencies, the purposes and principles embedded in the United Nations Charter are not a matter of convenience. They are not merely words on paper. They are at the core of who we are, and they reflect the driving mission of our United Nations. And they exist precisely to address any grievance, whatever it may be. 1 year ago, I sat in this council and urged, and I quote, "In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century, with consequences not only devastating for Ukraine, not only tragic for the Russian Federation, but with an impact we cannot even foresee in relation to the consequences for the global economy." End of quote. I said then that we must give peace a chance, but peace has had no chance. War has ruled the day. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law. It has unleashed widespread deaths, destruction, and displacement. Attacks on civilian and civilian infrastructure have caused many casualties and terrible suffering. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has documented dozens of cases of conflict-related sexual violence against men, women, and girls, and serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law against prisoners of war, and hundreds of cases of enforced disappearances and arbitrary detentions of civilians were also documented. Mr. President, life is a living hell for the people of Ukraine. An estimated 17.6 million people, nearly 40% of the population of Ukraine, require humanitarian assistance and protection. The crisis has erased 30% of pre-war jobs. The World Food Programme estimates that nearly 40% of Ukrainians are unable to afford or access enough food. And the war has sparked a displacement crisis not seen in Europe in decades. More than 8 million Ukrainian refugees have been recorded across Europe, in addition to an estimated 5.4 million who have been internally displaced. More than half of all Ukrainian children have been forced from their homes, with unaccompanied and separated children facing grave risks of violence, abuse, and exploitation. Vital infrastructure is under fire. Water, energy, and heating systems have been destroyed in the depths of a freezing winter. The World Health Organization has verified over 700 attacks on healthcare facilities, and more than 3,000 schools and colleges have been damaged or destroyed. Millions of students have had their education severely disrupted. Less measurable, but no less important, is the devastating impact of months of displacement and bombardment on the mental health of Ukrainians. Nearly 10 million people, including 7.8 million children, are at risk of acute post-traumatic stress disorder. And make no mistake, the Russian Federation is also suffering the deadly consequences. Monsieur le Président, nous avons besoin de paix, une paix conforme à la Charte des Nations Unies et au droit international. Tout en œuvrant pour la paix, nous continuerons d'appeler à agir sur plusieurs fronts. La protection des civils doit demeurer la priorité absolue. Les attaques contre les civils et les infrastructures civiles doivent cesser. L'emploi d'armes explosives à effet étendu dans les zones peuplées, dans les villes et les villages doit prendre fin. Un accès humanitaire sûr et sans entrave doit être garanti afin d'acheminer une aide vitale. Et il nous faut également investir dans le redressement et la reconstruction de l'Ukraine. À la demande du gouvernement ukrainien et au nom du système des Nations Unies, le programme des Nations Unies pour le développement procède conjointement avec la Banque mondiale à une évaluation des dégâts aux infrastructures énergétiques. Monsieur le Président, depuis le début de la guerre, l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique a aidé l'Ukraine à assurer la sûreté et la sécurité de ses 15 réacteurs en service dans 4 centrales nucléaires, dont la plus grande nucléaire d'Europe, à Zaporizhia. Une zone de sûreté, les menaces à peine nucléaires inacceptables. Lexigrain Turquie. Supply chains on more than 700 ships, helping to bring recovery. More than 20 million metric tons of foodstuffs have now been safely reconnected to global supply chains on more than 700 ships, helping to bring down prices around the world. I want to underscore the importance of all parties remaining engaged in this initiative and reiterate our call for it to be extended beyond March 2023. And the United Nations is firmly committed to working to remove remaining obstacles to Russian food and fertilizer exports, including ammonia. These exports are essential to our broader efforts to bring down prices and this food insecurity around the globe. Both efforts demonstrate that international cooperation is essential, valuable, and possible, even in the midst of conflict. Mr. President, over the past year, this Council has held more than 40 debates on Ukraine. The guns are talking now, but in the end, we all know, that the path of diplomacy and accountability is the road to a just and sustainable peace. Peace in line with the UN Charter, international law, and yesterday's resolution of the General Assembly. We must prevent further escalation. We must all encourage every meaningful effort to end the bloodshed and, at long last, give peace a chance. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, Secretary General, first of all, I would like to thank the Presidency of Malta for convening this important meeting. The General Assembly has just passed a resolution on the principles of comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. 141 member states took the side of the UN Charter, while 7 took the side of Russia. No additional explanations are required here. The resolution follows the logic of President Zelensky's peace formula. The goal of this 10-point plan is to restore respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, in full compliance with the UN Charter that we all have committed to respect and uphold. To make it short, the goal of the plan is to get Russia out of Ukraine and make the world a safer place. Obviously, any new peace proposals should now be aligned with demands set forth by the resolution. We invite all countries from every corner of the world to facilitate implementation of the resolution and the peace formula. We need to act jointly and quickly to ensure nuclear safety and security by forcing Russia to withdraw from the illegally occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and stopping missile attacks that endanger nuclear power plants across the territory of Ukraine. To avoid the threat of hunger, by furthering the Black Sea Grain Initiative and countering Russian efforts to undermine it, as well as by developing our Grain from Ukraine initiative. To prevent an energy crisis which will require the cessation of Russian missile terror against critical infrastructure of Ukraine. To protect the environment, as the Russian shelling that burned millions of hectares of Ukrainian forests threatens our efforts to counter global warming. But first and foremost, people must be saved. Their lives and their rights are at the center of our struggle for peace. The magnitude of the humanitarian crisis brought on by Russia's aggression against Ukraine cannot be overstated. I would like to highlight here only one of numerous horrendous facts. Russia is now implementing in Ukraine probably the largest instance of state-sponsored kidnapping of children in history of our modern world. Dear members of the Council, Ukraine will resist as it has done so far, and Ukraine will win. Putin is going to lose much sooner than he thinks. Here is what Russian officials and servicemen have to know. You think you would get away with what you did? No. You will end up on trial. You will be testifying how strongly you were opposed to the aggression and how you just followed orders. You think that the world will get tired of supporting Ukraine? The support will only get stronger. You think that Ukraine will eventually tire of defending itself? The more and the longer you will keep attacking Ukraine, the more resolve we will have and the more humiliating your defeat will be. Dear colleagues, Russian propaganda has fabricated this hypocritical narrative that supplying Ukraine with weapons fuels the war. Ukraine indeed needs weapons, just as a firefighter needs water to extinguish a fire. The fire that is destroying your home and killing innocent people. The sooner and the more we get, the sooner the fire will be extinguished. Arming a country that defends itself from the aggression is absolutely legitimate and is an act of defending the UN Charter. On the contrary, helping an aggressor is illegitimate and defies the Charter. Any supply of weapons or military equipment to Russia means complicity in the trampling of the UN Charter. If you give weapons to Russia, you commit a crime. In the short term, Ukraine needs to restore its sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. And in the long run, justice must be served. The Nuremberg International Military Tribunal's verdict was crystal clear. War of aggression is not only a war crime. It is the supreme international crime, distinguishing itself from other war crimes only in that it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. This is why we call for the establishment of the special tribunal with specific jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine and the ability to deal with personal immunities of principal perpetrators of this crime. The geography of Russian crimes against international peace and security goes far beyond the borders of Ukraine and reaches Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Russia not only incites conflicts, but also systemically obstructs UN Security Council decisions needed to resolve them. Today, Russia argued that this council is overly focused on Ukraine and ignores problems of the rest of the world. Let us all remember the truth. Russia is the problem of the world. I opened the UN Charter that I have here in front of me, and I do not see the words, member states can attack other member states at their will, end of quote. I don't see the words, violating borders is allowed. And furthermore, and most importantly, I do not see the words, the Russian Federation in the UN Charter on the list of permanent Security Council members. In 1991, Russia usurped the USSR seat of the permanent Security Council member and turned it into the throne of impunity. The future of Russia in the United Nations should be determined in the context of the illegitimate change of plates from USSR to Russia in 1991 and responsibility for crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. I say it again and again, peace means justice. And all the peace-loving nations will win peace on the battlefield and at the diplomatic tables. Finally, on this tragic day, when we mourn lives and destinies broken by Russia, I kindly ask everyone to observe a minute of silence in memory of the victims of the aggression. I thank you, Mr. President.
يطلب الكاميرا ده مش نعمله انت يقولوا الساعة The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a statement.
Господин председатель, мы встаем, чтобы почтить память всех жертв произошедшего
of all victims of what has happened in Ukraine, starting in 2014. All of those who perished, all lives are priceless, and that is why we're rising to honor the memory of them all.
I thank the representative for their statement. Can you write? I thank His Excellency, Mr. Kuleba, for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Trade of Malta. I begin by thanking Secretary General Gutierrez, Excellency, launch and effort to end energy situation around the globe. It has destiny, opens by the face and international forms, international without delay. We must redouble the items of first must be the important in Ukraine. In this national accountability federal suspect, I must also express in and around constitutes a grave environmental and health environmental catastrophe, deteriorating, suggesting that the people undermines trust and high serious repercussions as members principles support. In closing, to address the consequences towards a life and to unconditionally, completely with borders. I resume my function as President of the Council. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States of America.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, fellow council members, 1 year and 1 week ago, on February 17th, 2022, I warned this council that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine. I said that Russia would manufacture a pretext and then use missiles, tanks, soldiers, cyber attacks to strike pre-identified targets, including Kyiv, with the aim of toppling Ukraine's democratically elected government. Russia's representative, the same representative who will speak today, called these, and I quote, groundless accusations. 7 days later, on February 24th, 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Due to fierce resistance by Ukraine's defenders, President Putin failed in his primary objective to conquer Ukraine, end its existence as an independent country, and absorb it into Russia. Then, he dusted off his Crimea playbook from 2014. He called snap referenda in 4 occupied parts of Ukraine, deported Ukrainians, bussed in Russians, held sham votes at gunpoint, and then manipulated the results to claim near unanimous support for joining the Russian Federation. When President Putin couldn't break the Ukrainian military, he intensified efforts to break Ukrainian spirit. Over the last year, Russia has killed tens of thousands of Ukrainian men, women, and children, uprooted more than 13 million people from their homes, destroyed more than half of the country's energy grid, bombed more than 700 hospitals, 2,600 schools, and abducted at least 6,000 Ukrainian children, some as young as 4 months old, and relocated them to Russia. And yet, the spirit of the Ukrainians remains unbroken. If anything, it's stronger than ever. When Ukraine launched a counteroffensive that retook large swaths of its territory, President Putin conscripted an additional 300,000 men, throwing more and more of Russia's young people into a meat grinder of his own making. And he unleashed the Wagner Group, mercenaries who have committed atrocities from Africa to the Middle East and now in Ukraine. Of course, that's not the whole story of the last year. There's also the story of Ukraine's people. Vastly outnumbered, they have fought bravely to defend their nation, their freedom, the right to determine their own future. And they've demonstrated inspiring unity in helping one another endure Moscow's relentless assault. Teachers and community members give classes in bunkers to children. City workers improvise patches to restore heat and power and water to residents. Neighbors set up soup kitchens to feed the hungry. There's also the story of how the international community has come together. The vast majority of member states have voted multiple times to condemn Russia's violations of the UN Charter and reject its illegal attempt to seize Ukrainian territory. Yesterday, 141 countries voted in the General Assembly for a resolution that reaffirms the core principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, denounces Russia's atrocities, expresses support for a just and comprehensive peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter. When President Putin tried to weaponize hunger, exploiting the worst global food crisis since the creation of the UN, the international community responded swiftly. Since the United States chaired a food security meeting last May, more than 100 countries have signed on to a set of concrete commitments to alleviate hunger. Thanks in large part to the Secretary General, Guterres, and Turkey, the Black Sea Grain Initiative loosened Russia's stranglehold on Ukraine's ports and brought down the cost of grain for the world. Now, as Moscow again tries to throttle its output, we have to ensure that that initiative is extended and expanded. When President Putin tried to weaponize energy, we redirected natural gas supplies from across the world so that countries Russia targeted could keep their people warm in the winter. And Europe took extraordinary steps to end its dependence on Russian energy. No country has endured greater hardship from Russia's war than Ukraine. But almost every country has felt the pain. And yet, nations around the world continue to stand with Ukraine. Because we all recognize that if we abandon Ukraine, we abandon the UN Charter itself and the principles and rules that make all countries safer and more secure. No seizing land by force. No erasing another country's borders. No targeting civilians in war. No wars of aggression. If we do not defend these basic principles, we invite a world in which might makes right, the strong dominate the weak. That's the world this body was created to end. And members of this Council have a unique responsibility to make sure that we do not return to it. We can do that in three ways. First, we must push for a just and durable peace. Now, I expect that many countries will call for peace today. No one wants peace more than the Ukrainian people. And the United States has long made clear, even before this war, that we're prepared to engage in any meaningful diplomatic effort to stop Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But history teaches us that it's the nature of peace that matters. For peace to be just, it must uphold the principles at the heart of the UN Charter: sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence. For peace to be durable, it must ensure that Russia can't simply rest, rearm, and relaunch the war in a few months or a few years. Any peace that legitimizes Russia's seizure of land by force will weaken the Charter and send a message to would-be aggressors everywhere that they can invade countries and get away with it. President Zelensky has put forward a 10-point plan for a just and durable peace. President Putin, by contrast, has made clear that there's nothing to talk about until Ukraine accepts, and I quote, the new territorial realities, while doubling down on his brutal tactics. Members of this Council have a fundamental responsibility to ensure that any peace is just and durable. Council members should not be fooled by calls for a temporary or unconditional ceasefire. Russia will use any pause in fighting to consolidate control over the territory it's illegally seized and replenish its forces for further attacks. That's what happened when Russia's first assault on Ukraine froze in 2015. Look at what followed. And members of this Council should not fall into the false equivalency of calling on both sides to stop fighting or calling on other nations to stop supporting Ukraine in the name of peace. No member of this Council should call for peace while supporting Russia's war on Ukraine and on the UN Charter. In this war, there is an aggressor and there is a victim. Russia fights for conquest. Ukraine fights for its freedom. If Russia stops fighting and leaves Ukraine, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. The fact remains, one man, Vladimir Putin, started this war. One man can end it. Second, even as we work to end Russia's war against Ukraine, members of this Council must continue to address other challenges to international peace and security. We hear the concerns of countries who worry that standing with Ukraine and holding Russia accountable is diverting focus and resources from others in need. To those countries, I would say simply, look at our actions. And when you hear Russia and its defenders accuse the countries who support Ukraine of ignoring the rest of the world, I say, look at Moscow's actions. Compare the numbers. In addition to the $13.5 billion in food aid that the United States contributed to fight hunger over the last year, we also fund more than 40% of the World Food Programme's budget. Russia contributes less than 1% of that budget. That's not an outlier. Based on the latest UN figures, the United States donates over 9 times as much as Russia to UN peacekeeping. We donate 390 times as much as Russia to UNICEF. We give nearly 1,000 times as much as Russia to the UN Refugee Agency. Third, we must reaffirm our commitment to upholding what the UN Charter calls, and I quote, the dignity and worth of the human person. We must continue to compile evidence of Russia's ongoing and widespread atrocities, including executions, torture, rape and sexual violence, the deportation of thousands of Ukrainian civilians to Russia. We must continue to document Russia's war crimes and crimes against humanity and share this evidence with investigators and prosecutors so that one day the perpetrators can be held accountable. Day after day of Russia's atrocities, it's easy to become numb to the horror, to lose our ability to feel shock and outrage. But we can never let the crimes Russia's committing become our new normal. Bucha is not normal. Mariupol is not normal. Irpin is not normal. Bombing schools and hospitals and apartment buildings to rubble is not normal. Stealing Ukrainian children from their families and giving them to people in Russia is not normal. We must not let President Putin's callous indifference to human life become our own. We must force ourselves to remember that behind every atrocity in this wretched war, in conflicts around the world, is a human being. I recently visited an exhibit of artwork made by Ukrainian children affected by the war. One painting I saw was made by a 10-year-old girl named Veronica. Last April, Russian forces shelled her home in Vuhledar, killing her whole family. When first responders dug her from the rubble, a piece of shrapnel was lodged in her skull. Her left thumb had been ripped off. Doctors saved her life, but the attack left her right hand mostly paralyzed, and she can't see out of her left eye. In her painting, Veronica drew herself in a bright pink and orange dress, holding a bouquet of flowers. A building stands next to her. When asked who lived there, she said it was a place where all the people she knew who had been killed in the war could be safe. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. That's how the UN Charter begins. Fellow members of this Council, now is the time to meet that promise. There are so many people in Ukraine who want the same thing as that little girl, Veronica. A world where they can live in peace, in their own country, and keep the people they love safe. We have the power. We have the responsibility to create that world today and for generations to come. We cannot, we will not let one country destroy it. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Blinken, for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Solta Shachka, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of Albania.
Mr. President, a brief note and Christians orders measures for peace, and I have to talk about history and their country to be proud. This war
while this council was meeting in the community, and the first two boys, people, the security situation, some died, prevent unjustifiable war, withdrawing its occupying troops to allow a realistic ceasefire aimed at restoring peace and security in Ukraine, peace and security grounded in the respect for their sovereignty, territorial. All of the
is chilling and distressing. The Russian aggression against Ukraine is an enormous shock for us. A year of war, justice, foundation. So, thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Cassis, for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Yoshimasa Hayashi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for organizing, General. 1 year ago today, right here in this very chamber, right in the middle of the discussion on how to pre-concept insult, it demonstrated how little Russia cares about the UN. At that very moment, I remember vividly, Secretary General Guterres called on the Russian leader, I quote, "President Putin, stop the military operation, bring the troops back to Russia," unquote. his call still echoes in my ears. The collector, Mr. President, youngest member of the respect within its internationally legal condemned responsibility here. We must be well in the that any security that the member
for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France.
Today marks 1 year of human rights and of international humanitarian to guarantee the safety and security of talks of peace, and here emphasizing its right to self-defense, worthy of the responsibilities conferred upon it as a
Cleverly, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. Secretary General, thank you also. Today, we mark 1 year since President Putin began. 3 months ago, I travelled to Kyiv. Ukraine's Foreign Minister, who is sitting with us here today, greeted me. And he had promised to host me for lunch, but I, on civilian infrastructure, had knocked out the water and the electricity supply to that city. But Dmytro, Kyiv, were not going to let Putin's bombs stop him from rigged up a generator and brought in litres of bottled water, and they provided the lunch. Fatality in our job, but that shows something very important. It was a clear demonstration that whilst Ukrainians may have been hit and hit hard, their spirit will not be broken. That restaurant wanted to show me that they would not give up, but they would keep calm and carry on. Keep our promise to the world. Over the past year, local order integrity, powerful nation to protect the supporters of the dem about the UN Charter of northern Ukraine soldiers' hopeless ambition, coercive. We must not deviate. This war is over, and it will be over with Ukraine's successful defense. Again, in investment is for this war to end now. And indeed, this can send a clear message. Never be not territorial integrity.
To His Excellency, Mr. Kwaku Apratwum Sarpong, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General and Security of Ukraine. I also thank the Secretary in the past 12 months on the humanitarian ambition for an end to the war in Ukraine. The territorial integrity of Ukraine. On the 24th of February, Ukraine, our worst fears were born denials by the Russian Federation to any assertions that the mountain presence of its troops along its shared borders with Ukraine was in preparation for an invasion of Ukraine. Ghana at that time had urged for the de-escalation of tensions and the tampering of war rhetoric. Regrettably, that night, as the Council met, the Russian Federation, without justification, began its actions to violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbor Ukraine. The use of force, protection of maintenance of the concerns, collective security of its members in for hegemonic advantage. As humanitarian toll, 13,287 the indemnities of engaged in people believe priority should be given to implementing those recommendations, especially to support Africa's economic transformation and its capacity to address the growing debt crisis and the interlinked consequences of the war. Given the centrality of Russia Federation and Ukraine in the global grain and fertilizer markets, we support the further renewal of the Black Sea Grain Initiative to ease global market volatilities that hold long economic effects, necessary attention to products and fertilizers. To strengthen their efforts.
See Ms. Lana Nuseibeh, Permanent Representative and Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation for Political Affairs of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank the Secretary General for his briefing, and I welcome the participation of Ukraine's Foreign Minister today in this meeting. We cannot begin except with an expression of deep sorrow for the lives lost and shattered in the war in Ukraine. We mourn the at least 8,000 civilians killed, and we share in the grief of their loved ones. We are appalled as we mark 1 year of this cruel war, that we do so in the knowledge that it enters its second year. Over the past 2 days, from the podium of the General Assembly, we heard a virtually uninterrupted appeal for peace. A global, diverse, and representative majority issued an unambiguous message. Enough. This majority is united by neither allegiance to one side nor hostility to the other. They come together not to preserve geopolitical gain or reverse loss. They are not motivated by petty grievance or grand ambition. They have no interest or ability to wade into great power conflict. In the historical processes and events that forged today's Europe, they were, for the most part, observers, too often unwillingly impacted. Yet, the incontestable fact is that an overwhelming majority of member states are rising to the defense of the UN Charter. It is the Charter that upholds sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. It is the Charter that rejects wars of aggression, conquest, and annexation. It is the Charter that organizes our open and cooperative international order. The question is simple, and it is settled. Those truths, however self-evident, are nonetheless challenged by the war still raging on Ukraine. Military setbacks have been met with military escalation, while the front lines are little changed. The costs, however, have only grown. In Ukrainian lives and livelihoods, in the damage to cities and towns, in the destruction of civilian infrastructure. The war's reach has extended far beyond Ukraine, disrupting food and energy markets, worsening the global debt crisis, and weakening international norms, rules, and laws. Exactly 1 year ago today, the global call for diplomacy and peace went unheeded as the war broke out. Now, we risk its escalation as more battalions mobilize for new offensives. Yesterday, member states renewed their urgent and sincere call for an end to this war. Leaders across the world are responding with mediation efforts and peace plans. Now is the time to invest in inclusive and imaginative diplomacy by truly leveraging this global majority for peace. We must reinforce the Secretary General's offered role as a mediator with consistent, robust, and determined backing. The post-war vision must also incentivize Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table, not to the battlefield. The war will not end if either side is more threatened by the alternative. Steered by the Charter and history, we can dedicate ourselves towards a peace that is neither vindictive nor callous. We are under no illusions that this effort will be easy. Too much blood has been spilt, too much damage has been done. But all of us should dread with equal certainty what looms in the wake of its failure. Mr. President, Richard Holbrooke once described an effort to end a different war in Europe as something like a combination of chess and mountain climbing. Reaching the summit at which this war ends will require a series of small moves. Renewing the Black Sea Grain Initiative, realizing the MOU on Russian fertilizer and food products, preserving the non-proliferation regime, enhancing humanitarian assistance, continuing prisoner exchanges, and refraining from turning multilateral institutions into a battlefront. To achieve all of that, we must aspire for coordination in our approaches, not conformity. And we must encourage, indeed nurture, all efforts motivated by a genuine desire to peacefully resolve this war. To do that, we must value, not vilify, open lines of communication. That is the path the UAE has chosen. It is the path we have pursued in defense of the UN Charter for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, preserving its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency, Ms. Nusaybeh, for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Exactly 1 year, and have used to grow this, spelling out every day that this day continues, risk of a nuclear war, which would be without a doubt the path of no return towards irremediable damage and chaos. This war is unsustainable and must immediately cease. From the blood flow, that are asking themselves when they can return to parties or to
of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, today is the last day of a week which was anything but simple, and it will be remembered by one and all for the information hullabaloo which was created by Ukraine, its Western sponsors, related to the 1-year mark of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. And it would seem that this is what what the promise boils down to, the promise made by Mr. Kuleba in January to have a peace summit in New York, so as to analyze what was said by our former Western partners during this week. We could, without exaggeration, convene a whole political science conference, and possibly that this will happen in the future. Well, people will want to cast a retrospective eye on this. And for such a political science conference, we could propose the following title: Yet Another Missed Opportunity to Peacefully Resolve the Ukrainian Crisis. And this would be right, because any expression using the word peace, which are being disingenuously used, including today by high representatives of Ukraine and Western countries, what is meant is actually something completely different. What is meant is a capitulation of Russia and inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, ideally followed by the disintegration of the country and redrawing the territories it includes. These true goals of Western interference in Ukrainian affairs were clearly displayed, by the way, almost exactly 9 years ago on the day of the Maidan anti-constitutional coup on the 21st of February 2014. And people didn't hide them from the very beginning. And these are exactly the goals which resulted in the fact that on our borders we have a hostile, nationalistic, Russophobic regime which decided that they would resolve the Ukrainian issue with zeal. Our British colleague yesterday, when she spoke in the General Assembly and she criticized the Belarus submitted amendments to the draft resolution, she stated that the amendments equate the aggressor and the victim. Are you not at all concerned by the fact that your victim is up to its elbows in blood and Nazi tattoos, and the 9-year-old period of elimination of Russian-speaking citizens in Donbass? Do you think it's normal? Why do you think it's normal for Ukraine to send guns and tanks against unarmed civilians in the east and bomb them only because those people do not want to give up on their own identity? Because that is exactly what the Kiev regime did in the summer of 2014, and it was then the internal Ukrainian armed conflict erupted. Do you think that we were supposed to resign ourselves to this situation? Please allow me to remind you that its aggression against Yugoslavia was justified by NATO by the campaign of terror and the need for the Kosovars to live in security and enjoy universal human rights and freedoms on an equal basis. This is a quote from a statement made by NATO on the 23rd of April, 1999. So then you and your other colleagues then deny the Russian-speaking Ukrainians of the universal rights and freedoms if you present the Kiev authorities who attack them as a victim. You also are silent about the campaign of terror unleashed against them. For us, it is obvious that Ukraine is not a victim, because if Ukraine did not wage war against the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, as you condoned it, but rather heeded their aspirations, then there would have been no need for our special military operation. And the Crimea probably would have remained within Ukraine, because the people of the Crimea only decided to choose reunification with Russia only after there were direct threats from the Kiev authorities. I would like to take opportunity of the fact that we have Ms. Kolona and Ms. Baerbock here at the meeting, and I would like to raise yet one more very inconvenient for our Western colleagues topic, namely the Minsk agreements. We have all heard recently the confessions made by François Hollande, by Angela Merkel, and by Boris Johnson. They said that neither France nor Germany nor the United Kingdom ever viewed the agreements seriously, had no intention to urge the Ukrainian authorities to implement them, and only used the agreement so to bide the time and give Kiev time to prepare for a war with Russia. Now, even if you disregard the dimension side of the issue, and we have no illusion about the moral qualities of our Western colleagues by now, what we have here is that the leaders of these states openly basically stated that they knowingly violated Security Council Resolution 2202, which enshrined the Minsk agreements. But this does not stop the ministers of foreign affairs of these very states from lecturing other member states here in the Council today. Furthermore, a trite cliché we heard during this week and a debate a lot earlier, it consists of the fact that if Russia is to end the war will end, and if the Ukraine will stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. It sounds pretty, but it's absolutely false. Where, when, and from whom did you hear that the goal of our military operation is to destroy Ukraine, to de-Ukrainize Ukraine? We have never stated such a goal. We have always wanted to have right next to us, as was the case before, to have a friendly neighbor who doesn't threaten us, does not discriminate against anyone, and is not trying to resurrect Nazism. Therefore, this slogan of yours, in actual fact, should be as follows. If Russia stops hostilities, the Ukraine will continue discrimination against the Russian-speaking people, those who do not want to live with violence. Its rights and freedom will continue to be violated, and the glorification of Nazi criminals will continue. If Ukraine ends hostilities, it will get the chance to be reborn as a normal, peace-loving state and will save many thousands of lives. And that is why we have stated on many an occasion that we are ready to negotiate about how the goals of our special military operation could be implemented using peaceful means. But of course, any mechanism which are underpinned by other kind of scenarios, we are not prepared to consider. Colleagues, we have stated many times this week that ending hostilities in Ukraine is not something that the collective West is interested in, and only collective West alone. They, as we know for a fact, prevented the Kiev regime from making peace in April last year, and our Western colleagues currently are happy with everything. The Russians and Ukrainians are killing each other, the Western defense companies are getting fabulous profits, and they have a platform for testing new weaponry, and NATO is getting rid of its old weapons and is rearming. But Washington is also weakening its European competitors, who are displaying heretofore unseen servility and impotence. And this is something that we talked about at length in this chamber yesterday. And most importantly, the West is rubbing its hands and hoping that it will weaken Russia, will threaten China, and will keep its monopoly position in the world, remain the only so-called blossoming garden, as was stated by Mr. Borrell, on this jungle planet. Then the top golden billion will continue enriching itself at the expense of others, pitting countries against each other, using their natural resources and exploiting its people. And that is what is meant by the rules-based order, which Russia dared infringe upon because we don't want to accept a Russophobic wasp's nest at our borders. We want to make sure that the developing countries have no illusions about what this conflict is really about. And of course, resolving this conflict is inseparable from the issues having to do with just and indivisible system of European and Atlantic security. Currently, it only works for the United States and its NATO allies. They arrogated to themselves the right to interfere in any international issues and internal affairs of other countries. Ukraine is a very good example. Their bases are deployed on our borders in violation of key understandings ending the period of Cold War. Western leaders lied to us then and want to continue deceiving us now. For them, the right of NATO to expand uncontrollably is absolute, and they keep telling us tall tales about how much money they spend for development purposes, as was just done by State Secretary Blinken. Let me just recall here that after the Cold War alone, the United States conducted 251 military operations abroad and inflicting untold damage on those countries. Even if you pay 100 times more than you do now, you will not be able to make up for that damage. The collective West need to understand and accept the fact that there are other players on the planet with their own interests, and you have to coexist with them, or you can even cooperate them in mutual interests. But this has to be done on an equal and respectful basis. A unipolar world is in the past, and it's our mutual interest to make sure that we transition to a multipolar world with as few upheavals as possible. And we would like to hope that the Ukrainian crisis will be the last hot phase of such a transition. This is how a genuine discussion of peace should look like, possibly within the UN. And the sooner we start talking about it like this, the better. We tried to start such a dialogue before the special military operation at the end of 2021, but all our proposals to have such a dialogue was spurned by the West. The price was paid by the Ukrainian people. The Kiev regime sacrificed the Ukrainian people for the purposes of Western geopolitical interests. We welcome genuine efforts to have peace, such as, for example, the Chinese proposal. Though the choices here is up to our former Western partners, first and foremost Washington. Obviously, after everything we've discovered about you this year, after limitless and disgusting Russophobia and the attempts to cancel Russia, after supplying the Zelensky regime with weapons which were used to kill women, children, and the elderly in Donbass, after your Ukrainian venture and trying to create difficulties for us on our borders, our relations will never be the same. We do not believe you, and restoring our trust will be very difficult, if at all possible, because what's important here are deeds, not words. But attempting to do this, it's in your interest. At this point, you're just worsening the situation by continuing to pump the Kiev regime with weapons and helping them in the battlefield. And you leave us with no option other than to eliminate threats to Russia from the territory of Ukraine militarily. Please bear this in mind when you start making up new anti-Russian initiatives at the UN and pass them off as evidence of support for Ukraine in the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor now to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to thank the presidency of Malta. We like global effects and ramifications, especially to which Mozambique thinks that we need to strongly support the good office of the Secretary General He's to promoting peace and security. The country
discuss the return of the parties to the negotiating table. Position recent resolution of the General Assembly for those who are careful commitments and
national community president.
Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. It has been 1 year since the full outbreak of the Ukraine crisis. Its development is causing great concern to all of us. The international community, while deeply concerned about the prospect of the expansion and prolonging of the conflict, should think cool-headedly about how to stop the fighting as soon as possible and how to realize long-term peace and stability in Ukraine and Europe. China issued earlier today a position document on the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. We have always taken an objective and impartial stance based on the merits of the issue and are ready to continue to play a responsible and constructive role in easing the situation and resolving the crisis. Here I'd like to highlight the following points. First, when handling and solving international disputes, universally recognized international law, including the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, must be upheld. The sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all countries must be effectively guaranteed. Observing universally recognized international law and the basic norms governing international relations bears on the stability of the international system and international fairness and justice. They should be equally and uniformly applied in every place and on every issue without exception. Some country, while stressing sovereignty and territorial integrity on the Ukraine issue, is blatantly interfering in other countries' internal affairs and undermining their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This reveals its double standard at full display. The international community is clear-eyed about this. Second, to facilitate a political solution to the Ukraine issue, there is a need to pursue common security. Security is not an exclusive right enjoyed only by some countries. The security of a country should not be pursued at the expense of others. Strengthening or even expanding military blocs will only undermine regional security and will never bring about peace. Russia, Ukraine, and European countries are neighbors that cannot physically move away. To realize lasting peace and stability in Europe, the Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation must be abandoned, and the legitimate security concerns of all countries must be taken seriously and addressed properly so as to build a balanced, effective, and sustainable regional security architecture. Third, conflicts have no winners. Long-term diplomatic negotiations is the only right way to solve the Ukraine crisis. The international community should promote peace and talks with the highest sense of urgency and work to create enabling factors and platforms for the resumption of negotiation. Bringing parties to the conflict back to the negotiating table is not going to be easy, but it is the first step toward a political solution. Just now, Secretary General Guterres also appealed that we give peace a chance. We call on Russia and Ukraine to resume negotiations without any preconditions. Ukraine is not an arena for fights between major countries. No one should seek to benefit from the conflict at the cost of the Ukrainian people. Fourth, it is imperative to never cross the red line of nuclear security under any circumstances. Nuclear weapons must never be used and nuclear war must never be fought. Faced with the risk that the Ukraine crisis could lead to an escalation of the conflict, major countries bear a special and important responsibility to maintain communication and coordination and to do everything they can to prevent a nuclear crisis. The international community should jointly oppose armed attacks against nuclear power plants or other peaceful nuclear facilities, ensure strict compliance with the Convention on Nuclear Safety, among others, and support the IAEA in playing a constructive role in promoting the safety and security of peaceful nuclear facilities. Fifth, The humanitarian crisis is worsening and should be proactively and properly addressed. The international humanitarian law is a code of conduct that must be strictly observed in conflict situations. Relevant parties should avoid attacking civilians or civilian facilities, protect the vulnerable, including women and children, ensure humanitarian access, and respect the basic rights of prisoners of war. The international community should increase its humanitarian assistance, help restore civilian infrastructure, ensure basic livelihood of refugees and the displaced persons, with a view to preventing a humanitarian crisis on a larger scale. At the same time, humanitarian operations should, in earnest, follow the principles of neutrality and impartiality and avoid politicization. Sixth, each country is responsible for the important task of promoting its people's livelihood and development. Efforts should be made to manage the spillovers of the crisis. The Ukraine crisis has far-reaching impacts, but the developing countries are not parties to this conflict and should not pay an excessively high price for it. Some relevant parties have been resorting to unilateral sanctions and maximum pressure, which cannot solve any issue and can only undermine the stability of the global industrial and supply chain and exacerbate the global food, energy, and financial crises. We hope that the relevant parties take responsible actions and stop abusing unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction. The Black Sea Grain Initiative and the MOU signed by the UN and Russia on the export of food products and fertilizers have great significance for ensuring global food security and should be implemented fully and effectively in a balanced manner. Mr. President, the road to peace will not be smooth, but no matter how complicated the situation is, we must never give up our hopes for peace and efforts for peace. On the Ukraine issue, China has always stood and will continue to stand on the side of peace and dialogue. We stand ready to work with all parties to promote a political solution to the Ukraine crisis and strive for the early arrival of peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General. Today, exactly 1 year ago, Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, starting a massive invasion of a peaceful neighbor. And for 1 year, we have all seen the Ukrainians fighting to defend their country. They deserve the solidarity of everyone around the world, every country, and every person. I will just make two essential points. First, why Russia's war of choice matters to all of us. And second, how to get peace. We need to be clear. I said war of choice because this war is the war of President Putin choosing war. And for 1 year, we have seen the horrors, 30 million people homeless, 20 million in need of humanitarian assistance, and tens of thousands of Ukrainians forced to leave their country and seek refuge across Europe. Families torn apart, in a catalogue of crimes, the forced deportation of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children stands out for its depravity. Abduction of innocent Ukrainian children, the changing of their personal status, including nationality, to be adopted by Russian families is a clear violation of human rights and international law, and violates also the Geneva Convention. These children, these Ukrainian children, need to be returned to Ukraine immediately. So, crimes against humanity. I've been to Bucha and seen for myself the civilians killed, with some having their hands tied behind their back before they were executed. And who can forget Mariupol? I would again like to pay tribute to the United Nations for their efforts in securing the safe passage of civilians trapped inside the Azovstal steel plant. Russian forces have been shelling Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure for months. Air raid sirens have become a disturbingly regular feature of Ukrainian lives, as I witnessed myself and many of you when I was in Kiev 10 days ago. Oui, un an après, le bilan de la guerre est catastrophique pour le peuple ukrainien, mais les effets de la guerre sont aussi planétaires, avec insécurité alimentaire.
In food insecurity and energy insecurity are leading to price spikes whose effects are catastrophic for the most vulnerable people. Rising costs of foodstuffs and essential goods have added an additional burden to the already difficult daily lives of many countries around the world. It is for that reason that this war affects us all. The European Union and its member states have for a year contributed to lightening this burden that is the consequences of the war. In Africa, for example, more than 1.5 billion euros have been disbursed for food security initiatives in the countries most affected in the Sahel, Lake Chad, and in the Horn of Africa.
Mr. President, this war matters. Yes, this war matters a lot, both for the principles at stake and for the shockwave it's creating. And it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. And this brings me to the second point, maybe the most important one. How do we get to peace? Because everybody is asking for peace. But how? How do we get to peace? Let's hear here at the United Nations and around the world a growing clamor for peace. That was the clear message that the General Assembly sent yesterday. While the Security Council has been blocked, the General Assembly stated, with an overwhelming majority of 141 versus 7, that the world condemns the aggression, that Russia must withdraw its troops, that the world wants and needs peace, but not just any peace. No, we want a just peace, based on international law and United Nations Charter. And it is urgent for the Kremlin to hear this message and to act on it. Look into the future. We need to build on this resolution and make it happen. President Zelensky has presented a 10-point peace plan, and we support it. Because we, the European Union, we will remain ready to work with all genuine partners and ideas that support Ukraine's effort to secure a comprehensive, just and lasting peace as the United Nations General Assembly voted based on the United Nations Charter and international law. And meanwhile, we will continue to support Ukraine to defend itself and protect its people, because the search of peace and our support to Ukraine go hand in hand, both things together, not either or, both. Search for peace and support to Ukraine. And with that, I want to make a final point. Our principal support for Ukraine does not come at the expense of our engagement elsewhere in the world. On the contrary, the European Union remains fully mobilized to promote sustainable peace elsewhere, because we know that there are many more wars, many more tragedies, many more problems around the world that needs our support and our concern. It's not instead of, it's on top of. We continue doing the same thing that we have been doing until now. And we have a strong track record on engagement around the world, financially, politically, with more than 5,000 women and men deployed in 21 crisis management operations. Just this week, we launched 2 more, one in Armenia and another in Niger. Yes, there are many other many other problems, many other wars, many other sufferances around the world, we take care of them. We work for the peace in Ukraine and be that reliable partner for peace around the world, wherever the peace is in danger and people suffering. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Borrell for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Rastislav Kase, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia.
Mr. President, 1 year ago, the Security Council had a meeting in this very room, around this very table, and the main purpose of the meeting was to discuss the unprecedented military buildup of the Russian force posing a threat to international peace and security. The last hope to persuade Russia to de-escalate the situation and engage constructively in negotiations was shattered with the words of the ambassador of Ukraine at the time, warning members of the Security Council that it was already too late to speak about the de-escalation, as the Russian president had declared war. And we all know this happened despite numerous assurances of Russia claiming to have no intention to invade its neighbor. This was the night when the whole international community was informed of Russia's decision to begin an unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine, in violation of all fundamental values and principles of the UN Charter and international law. Yes, that's Russian Federation holding the permanent seat in this chamber is primarily responsible for maintaining peace and security. Needless to say, at that moment, the faith in multilateralism was shaken from its foundations. Despite the pain and suffering which have been caused since the senseless war started, the Russian Federation has been ignoring calls of the international community to end this agony. And I do not really understand in which parallel universe depriving millions of innocent people of electricity, heat, water, and plunging the country into darkness can be justified under the pretext of so-called special military operation. It is rather cynical how systematic and thorough Russia has been in spreading propaganda and distorting the facts. It seems that Russia has been promoting some kind of alternative reality, a behavior which we condemn once again. We reiterate our call for an immediate cessation of Russian military activities in Ukraine and unconditional withdrawal of all Russian troops from the whole territory of Ukraine. This also concerns temporarily occupied Crimea, as well as other territories of Ukraine, including those where the Russian Federation, together with local puppet authorities, orchestrated the so-called referendum in blatant breach of international rules. We are extremely concerned about the number of civilian casualties enumerated since the beginning of the invasion to Ukraine. According to OHCHR, it's well over 8,000 killed and over 13,000 injured. But needless to say, we all know that the fact that the real numbers are much bigger than that. Slovakia has stood by Ukraine since the very beginning of Ukraine defense against Russia aggression, and we will continue our steadfast support of Ukraine, including its independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, until this shameless war is over. However, it's also one fact which is undeniable. The war will be over one day, and those responsible for all crimes committed will be held responsible and brought to justice. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Kashev, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Bogdan Aurescu, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Romania.
Mr. President, I commend the Maltese Presidency of the Security Council for organizing this open debate. For a year now, Romania, a direct neighbor to Ukraine, has been at the forefront of helping Ukraine and countering the multifaceted consequences of the atrocious, illegal and unprovoked war waged by the Russian Federation, a permanent member of the Security Council against Ukraine, a sovereign independent country. The impact of this irrational war has reached far and wide. Violations of international humanitarian law and the attacks on critical civilian infrastructure made millions of Ukrainians flee. Grain and energy chains have been disrupted, leading to sharp increase of energy prices and the threat of famine all over the globe, and especially to the most vulnerable in the south. Fear of a nuclear catastrophe daunt us again. Hybrid tactics test or try to intimidate us, putting pressure on Ukraine and its neighbors like the Republic of Moldova, others in the Black Sea region or the wider European continent and the Euro-Atlantic security area as a whole. This war represents a direct attack on the integrity of the rules-based international system, our security, prosperity and core values. But in front of this threat, nothing is clearer than this. We will stand united and strong for as long as it takes. Ukraine will win, and Russia will bear the responsibility for what it has done. Our call is also clear. Russia must abide by the rules of international law. It must unconditionally cease the use of force and withdraw completely and immediately from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We are here today in the Security Council chamber, the guarantor of international peace and security, to stand by the side of the UN Charter and international law, and reiterate that there is only one way to end this aggression. I welcome the resolution adopted yesterday in the General Assembly by a very large majority of states, which put the principles of the UN Charter above all, including national or regional interests. It is in our power to mitigate the effects of this war on the future. From day on of this war, Romania acted in full solidarity with the brave Ukrainian people. We made considerable investments in food, energy and transportation infrastructure, along with welcoming over 3.6 million Ukrainian refugees that have transited our territory. So far, we have facilitated the delivery of over 13 million tons of Ukrainian grain, contributing to global food security efforts. Romania hopes for a positive outcome in the long run and the continuation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Romania has also been a strong supporter of the efforts to seek accountability for all serious crimes committed in Ukraine, including the crime of aggression. We joined the core group of states that works alongside Ukraine to identify the most appropriate legal basis to establish a tribunal to this purpose. The ongoing war in Ukraine has a major impact in the region. We have extended a helping hand to our neighbor, the Republic of Moldova, the country most affected by the war except Ukraine itself. And I must bring to your attention that we are concerned with Russia's latest plans to destabilize the country, which we condemned. In this respect, it is absolutely unacceptable to see threatening rhetoric like the one included in the statement of the Russian Foreign Ministry of today, by which it announced that the Russian army would, I quote, adequately respond to so-called provocations or attacks against the Russian compatriots and the military personnel and depot from the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. Such provocative behavior based on nothing, based on ungrounded allegations, is completely unacceptable. And we fully support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova within its internationally recognized borders. As we approach the one-year milestone since the beginning of the war, all of us, including Romania, witnessed the Russian propaganda intensifying, spreading fake narratives in an attempt to undermine the unity of our societies and our efforts to support Ukraine. We must combat these malign influences, as we must continue to stand united to defend our values. The Romanian people must be mindful about the Russian-inspired stories they read and hear, but they shouldn't question our support for Ukraine. Supporting Ukraine means supporting Romania. Mr. President, as said before, this is the test of our generation. We have to work together at all the different layers of this conflict and bring peace back to its deserving place. Our message is straightforward: peace in full respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, peace in full respect of the UN Charter and of its fundamental principles of international law. And one political and moral principle is clear: negotiations can start only when Ukraine is ready, and the way victory looks like must be defined by Ukraine. Romania's support for Ukraine remains solid for as long as it takes. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Aurescu, for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Zbigniew Rau, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Poland.
Mr. President, Excellencies, let me begin with expressing my gratitude to Malta General for his valuable insights. Then, research. Let us start with contrasting the truth against the disinformation and misleading propaganda. And the truth is that exactly a year ago, Russia. The humanitarian costs of this war are the biggest. That is why I'm convinced that Russia's barbaric aggression against Ukraine is not a bilateral or regional issue. It is a concern of all states. What should be the guiding principle? Not the domestic laws of our countries. It is that in a well-ordered society, as secure as the powerful, commit similar crimes, that we are required to search for analogical solutions in the international law system. Therefore, I call to introduce the same rule of protecting the vulnerable against powerful villains in our international relations, both in the legal dimension and political practice. Let us build a well-ordered international community. In order to achieve that, international institutions with all their resources must stand on the side of the harmed and execute accountability and compensation from the aggressors, no matter how strong and powerful they are. I cannot envision the world without adhering to this rule. Can you? Thirdly, with respect to this golden rule, Poland's support to Ukraine is and will remain unwavering. Millions of Ukrainians found safe refuge in our country. In 2022, Poland spent over $9 billion, that is 1.5% of our GDP, on humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian refugees, according to the recent OECD estimate. We provide support and host over a dozen of UN agents in Ukraine from our territory. The values and we
Hungary.
Mr. President, dear Jan, thank you so much for organizing this session of the Security Council today at the first anniversary. I'm representing a country, Hungary, which is a direct neighbor to Ukraine. Therefore, the impacts of the war are severe and immediate on us. And we are faced with the tragic consequences basically on a daily basis, as we are witnessing the suffering of the people caused by this war. We have received a bit more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine so far. Unfortunately, mostly torn apart families. I have to tell you, it's heartbreaking to see the mothers arriving with the children, sometimes with the grandparents, mostly with one backpack to Hungary. We do want to help them. We are doing our best to help them. We give equal access to the refugees from Ukraine when it comes to our education and healthcare system. 1,300 schools and kindergartens in Hungary have already been enrolling refugee kids and students from Ukraine, and we give incentive to the companies in Hungary in order to employ refugees. All this together with many other measures are adding up for the largest humanitarian operation carried out in the history of Hungary. And I have to tell you that we are going to continue this large humanitarian action as long as it is needed. And from the neighborhood, we see it very clearly that this war brings a lot of suffering. This war does not have winners. This war does only have losers. And the longer this war lasts, the more losers there will be, more damage will be caused, and more people will be killed. And let me tell you that I'm representing a nation which has a number of casualties in this war as well. Given the fact that there is a Hungarian community living in the western part of Ukraine, members of which are Ukrainian citizens, obviously. So many of them are conscripted into the Ukrainian army. They are fighting on the front lines, and many of them have died already. And let me emphasize that we do not want more people to die in this war. In this regard, I'd like to underline the position of Hungary that we would consider as the #1 duty of the international community under such circumstances to save lives of the people and prevent more casualties. And the question is raised here how it is possible, obviously. And the answer is that you can save lives with peace. With deliveries of weapons, with further packages of sanctions, I don't see how we save lives of the people. But with peace, we definitely could. And I know very well that for this position of ours, we are usually under very heavy criticism. Not only heavy criticism, but on many occasions, totally insane accusations are being put on Hungary and its government. But those who criticize us and educate us, judge us, they have not lost any lives in this war, unlike we Hungarians. So that's why, Mr. President, dear Jan, dear colleagues, we call for immediate ceasefire and peace talks to be launched, as an outcome of which, hopefully, a sustainable peace could be reached. And it is obvious that peace cannot be made in case there are no channels of communication open. If channels of communication are being cut, stuck, closed, it means from our perspective that even the hope for peace is being given up. And once again, as a representative of a neighboring country, witnessing the suffering on a daily basis, I humbly ask you to concentrate on how to stop this war, how to avoid more people to die, and how to make peace. And dear Jan, together with you, I'm representing, and many of others, a generation which, thanks God, did not have to experience how life was during the World War. World War, a global war. And we do hope that neither us, nor our children, or our hopeful future grandchildren will have to experience such a life. And so far, this war came with global impacts. That's not the question. The question is whether we can avoid this war becoming a global war, a world war. Whether we can avoid measures, decisions, and even sometimes statements which bring the risk of escalation and prolongation of this war. I think all of us should refrain from such kind of measures, decisions, and statements which prolong and escalate this war. A third world war would be a real tragedy. A third world war would bring us to where hopefully none of us would like to go. In this regard, I think it's key that there is no direct confrontation being established between NATO and the Russian Federation. In NATO, we have a clear decision that NATO is not party to the conflict, and we do hope that this decision of ours will be respected by all. Dear Jan, dear colleagues, Hungarian people are not responsible for this war, but Hungary and the Hungarian people have already paid a high price. That's why we all know that we are in the 25th hour. We are in the 25th hour. So let's try to concentrate on how to stop this war, how to put an end to this war, how to establish an immediate ceasefire, and how to launch peace talks, which hopefully will bring us to a sustainable and fair peace. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Ziato, for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Annalena Baerbock, Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany.
Colleagues, Bucha, Kharkiv, Mariupol, Bakhmut. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is causing nothing but destruction, suffering, and death. Yesterday, the General Assembly sent a powerful message against this ruthless war. An overwhelming majority of 141 states stood united for peace in Ukraine. A peace that is just, comprehensive, and lasting. And the General Assembly presented a peace plan. A peace plan that is based on the principles of the bear in this work towards peace from a member of peace. Not naming the aggressor, some of you claim the states we have atrocities against that Ukraine ends. For 365 nights and days water that and planes only brought night and day destruction and death of thousands of fathers and mothers and children. And yes, it brought also death and destruction around the world, not directly by tanks and bombs, but by the food crisis and itself. But you cannot deceive the world. All those of us who sincerely and honestly believe in a peace that means peace, a peace based on the Charter of our United Nations, must show their true colors now and stand by the peace plan by the General Assembly. President Putin is speculating that at some point our clear stance against this war will weaken. He is speculating aggression, suffering, for one for them a crucial part of Russia's prosperity and the future of his own country, of his own soldiers, plenty. But what we can do for a world where peace.
Excellency, Ms. Baerbock, for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Edgars Rinkēvičs, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Latvia.
Mr. President, we will never accept Russia's illegal annexation. We support
Mr. Rinkēvičs for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ruslan Bolbosyan, Secretary of State of the Republic of Moldova.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council's Excellencies, the Republic of Moldova strongly condemns Russia's illegal and unfounded aggression against Ukraine territory. Inter-area gas blackmail on is our resolve to stay strong. The Republic of Moldova expresses its deep gratitude to all partners who have supported us risks in remarkable displays of solid efforts in Ukraine.
For freedom and over the power.
Excellency, Mr. Wopke Hoekstra, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm here today on behalf of the Group of Friends of Accountability following the aggression against Ukraine. a group of 49 member states and the European Union that share one strong conviction, that the power of justice should always prevail over the power of force. Today, it has been exactly 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the people of Ukraine have shown extraordinary courage and resilience in their continued fight for freedom and independence. And we've seen horrendous images and reports of the indiscriminate killing of civilians, men, women, infrastructure. Effective accountability measures. Measures that will contribute to deterrence and prevention of these horrendous crimes. Mr. President, Russia's aggression against Ukraine violates the UN. Strive to
are founded. Literally violated the basic and this
asked for a stronger United Nations. We are asking for as the United
North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, to conduct strikes in urban areas, leaving civilians and cities with obligations. Humanity committed National Court of War. We reiterate our demand.
As it comes from a permanent member of this Security Council, the body to which the UN Charter confers the key responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. Spain, like many other who are calling for the immediate forces own personal law with charge, why we are organization and therefore troops
of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine. I greatly
thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Alvarez Bueno. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jan Libavsky, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czechia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to participate in this Security Council debate. Czechia hosts the highest number of Ukrainian war refugees per capita, nearly 500,000, most of them women and children. We are one of the countries most affected by the direct consequences of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified full-scale, truly global markets. Ensured. Underlying. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lipavsky for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gordon Grlić-Radman, Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of Croatia.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to add some. A year ago, the Russian Federation sent most to invade and others to dismantle global security and other to defend its muscle with almost the same pretext and cynical justification of the endured day by the UN General Secretary. They are not getting tired. One that can enter international.
Thank you. Statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Urmas Reinsalu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia.
Thank you. Mr. President, Estonia is a neighbor of aggressor state Russia, and this war has impacted my country significantly. We have received tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. During the course of war, we have been under systematic cyber attacks coming from Russia. Russia has been waging its full-scale, brutal, unprovoked and genocidal war of aggression against Ukraine for 12 months now. Kremlin's goal to erase a sovereign and democratic Ukraine from the map has not changed. After a year of courageous fight, Ukraine deserves peace more than ever. However, it can't be a peace at all costs. We need just and lasting peace in full conformity with the UN Charter. Peace that upholds and reinforces rules-based international order with the UN and its core. Peace that prevents the use of force to redraw international borders. And these are exactly the same parameters that our overwhelming majority of the UN member states voted for in the UN General Assembly resolution yesterday.
The UN membership firmly supports a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine that rests on international law and the UN Charter. The Ukrainian peace plan is based on the same universal values and principles, and I therefore call upon the UN membership to support President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. Article 51 of the UN Charter grants every country a right to self-defense, and we need collectively to ensure that Ukraine can defend itself against the aggressor. We have seen the heinous atrocities that Russia has committed and unfortunately still is committing today in Ukraine. This must stop, and this is the reason why Estonia's military aid to Ukraine has reached 1% of our GDP. And we want sovereign Ukraine to survive this brutal aggression and win, because then peace and justice will be established. We call all peoples of the world to raise any support to Ukraine. Third, in order to achieve lasting peace, full accountability must be ensured. It includes our obligation to discredit completely aggression as an instrument of international relations. We owe it to the thousands of Ukrainians being killed, raped and forcibly displaced to hold Russia's political and military leadership to account for the crime of aggression. Therefore, an international special tribunal for the crime of aggression in Ukraine within the UN system must be established. We cannot let Mr. Putin hide in the judicial loophole. President Putin, time will come and you will sit under tribunal. It is high time to learn from the past. The horrors of war we are witnessing today are the tragic consequences of the fact that the atrocity crimes committed by the Soviet Union during the Second World War, including against my country and my people, were left unpunished. Not only would a tribunal serve justice to the victims of this horrendous crime, it also serves as a deterrent and can help to prevent future conflicts. Finally, today on the 105th anniversary of my country, Estonia's declaration of independence, our Independence Day, my thoughts are with our brave countrymen and women who fought for our freedom and independence. And yet I also pray for Ukraine and Ukrainians, who are the bravest people I know. Ukraine is not only defending its country, people and right to exist, but Ukraine is also defending common values of united mankind, international legal order and the UN Charter. Peace rises from truth. Russian Federation is a terrorist regime which commits genocide against Ukrainian people. The world needs to recognize that. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Reinsalu, for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.